For 23 years, I raised my daughter Amelia as a single mother, working double shifts at the diner and cleaning offices on weekends to give her everything she ever wanted. When she got engaged to Dylan, I was over the moon, already planning how I'd help make her dream wedding perfect. But 3 weeks before the big day, Amelia called and dropped a bombshell that shattered my heart. I was banned from her wedding reception because I would embarrass her in front of Dylan's wealthy family. She said I could attend the ceremony but had to leave immediately after. No photos, no celebration, no mother-daughter dance I'd dreamed of for years. What Amelia didn't know was that the elegant Grandview Manor she'd booked for her reception, the venue she'd bragged about securing through Dylan's connections, was actually mine. I'd bought it years ago as an investment, and now my own daughter was about to learn that sometimes the people you underestimate hold all the power. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. I never thought the phone call that would break my heart would come from my own daughter. After 23 years of being the only parent she ever knew, after sacrificing everything to give her the life she deserved, Amelia looked me in the eye. Well, technically through a phone screen, and told me I wasn't good enough to celebrate the most important day of her life. "Mom, I need to talk to you about the wedding," she had said, her voice carrying that cold, distant tone she'd developed since getting engaged to Dylan Green 6 months ago. I was in my small apartment, the same one I'd lived in for 15 years because every extra penny went toward Amelia's needs, her wants, her dreams. I was folding laundry, Dylan's expensive shirts that Amelia had asked me to wash and press because "you're so good at getting wrinkles out, Mom," when she delivered the blow that would change everything between us forever. "You can come to the ceremony," she continued, as if she was doing me some grand favor. "But you need to leave right after. The reception is only for Dylan's family and our close friends. His parents are very particular about appearances, and honestly, Mom, I don't think you'd be comfortable there anyway." I sat down hard on my worn couch, the same one I'd bought secondhand when Amelia was 12 because she needed a new laptop for school more than we needed furniture that matched. The phone felt heavy in my hands as I tried to process what she was saying. "Amelia, sweetheart, I don't understand. I'm your mother. I've been planning to give a speech, to dance with you." "Mom, please don't make this harder than it has to be," she interrupted, and I could hear Dylan's voice in the background, probably coaching her through this conversation. Dylan's family has certain expectations. His father owns 3 successful businesses. His mother went to Harvard. And honestly, when they ask what you do for a living, what am I supposed to say? That you work at Murphy's Diner and clean offices at night? Each word hit me like a physical blow. This was the same daughter who used to beam with pride when she'd visit me at the diner, who'd brag to her friends about how hard her mom worked, who'd written essays in school about how I was her hero. Now, my life's work, keeping us afloat, keeping her fed and clothed and educated, was something to be ashamed of. "Amelia, I worked those jobs for you. Every double shift, every weekend spent scrubbing floors. It was all so you could have opportunities I never had. I know, Mom, and I'm grateful, I really am. But this is my wedding day, and I need everything to be perfect. Dylan's family is already skeptical about him marrying someone who, well, someone who didn't grow up with their advantages. I can't have them looking down on me because of me," I finished quietly. "It's not personal, Mom. It's just practical. You'll love the ceremony. Father McKenna is officiating, and I picked those pink roses you always liked for the bouquet. You'll get to see me walk down the aisle, and that's what really matters, right? The rest is just a party." Just a party. The reception I'd dreamed about since she was born. The mother-daughter dance we'd planned to At Last by Etta James, because it was playing in the hospital room when she took her first breath. The speech I'd been writing and rewriting for months, The one where I planned to tell everyone how proud I was of the woman she'd become. "Just a party." "Where are you having the reception?" I asked, though I wasn't sure why it mattered. "Oh, we got so lucky." Amelia's voice brightened, clearly relieved to move to a safer topic. "Dylan's family has connections everywhere, and they managed to get us Grandview Manor for the same night. Can you believe it? It's this gorgeous estate on the hill overlooking the valley. I mean, it usually books up years in advance, and they charge like $25,000 just for the venue. But Dylan's dad knows someone who knows someone. We're getting it for just $15,000 because of the connection." Grandview Manor. My Grandview Manor. I'd bought the property 8 years ago when Mrs. Henderson, the original owner, was facing foreclosure. It had been my secret dream since. Amelia was small. To own something beautiful, something that could provide security for both of us. I'd scraped together the down payment using money I'd saved from tips and my weekend cleaning jobs, money I'd hidden away in a coffee can for years labeled Amelia's college fund. But when Amelia got a full scholarship to State University, I'd seen an opportunity. The manor was a steal at $200,000. Mrs. Henderson needed to sell quickly, and the property needed work. I'd spent 3 years renovating it slowly, learning plumbing and electrical work from YouTube videos, refinishing floors on my hands and knees after my diner shifts. I'd turned it into one of the most sought-after wedding venues in the county. Amelia had no idea. I'd kept the business separate from our personal life, hiring a management company to handle bookings and events while I continued working at the diner. The venue's success had been my safety net, my retirement plan, my way of ensuring I'd never be a burden to my daughter in my old age. And now she was planning to celebrate her wedding there while excluding the woman who'd made it all possible. "That sounds lovely, sweetheart," I managed to say, my voice remarkably steady considering my heart was breaking into 1,000 pieces. "I'm sure you'll have a beautiful celebration." "I knew you'd understand, Mom. You always do. And hey, maybe we can have a nice dinner together the week after, just the two of us, and I can show you all the photos." After we hung up, I sat in my quiet apartment for a long time, surrounded by the evidence of 23 years of single motherhood. The refrigerator covered with Amelia's honor roll certificates and achievement awards. The bookshelf filled, with photo albums documenting every birthday, every school play, every milestone. The small dining table where we'd shared thousands of meals together, where I'd helped her with homework every night until she left for college. I thought about the woman I used to be before Amelia was born. Margaret Cole, the girl who'd wanted to be a teacher but dropped out of college when she got pregnant at 19. Margaret Cole, who'd dreamed of traveling the world, but instead learned every bus route in town to get to her various jobs. Margaret Cole, who'd had ambitions and dreams of her own before they got tucked away in favor of someone else's needs. That night, for the first time in years, I allowed myself to feel angry. Not just hurt, not just disappointed, but genuinely, righteously angry. Because somewhere along the way, in my effort to give Amelia everything, I'd taught her that my sacrifices were invisible, that my love was a given, and that my worth was measured only by how well I could serve her needs while staying out of sight. But Amelia had forgotten something important. Before I was her mother, I was Margaret Cole, and Margaret Cole had worked too hard and sacrificed too much to be dismissed and discarded when she was no longer convenient. It was time my daughter learned that lesson. 23 years ago, I was Margaret Cole, a 19-year-old college sophomore with dreams of becoming a high school English teacher. I was studying at the State University, working part-time at the campus bookstore, and dating a charming business major named Robert Davis who promised me the world. I believed in fairy tales back then, believed that love conquered all, and believed that people meant the promises they made when they looked into your eyes and swore they'd never leave. I found out I was pregnant during finals week of my sophomore year. I remember sitting in the tiny bathroom of my dorm room, staring at that little pink plus sign, feeling my entire future shift beneath my feet. Robert was supposed to graduate that spring and had already accepted a job offer in California. We'd talked about getting married after I finished school, about the house we'd buy, the life we'd build together. When I told him about the pregnancy, his face went white. "Margaret, this changes everything. I have my whole career to think about. This job in California, it's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Maybe we should consider other options." Other options. He meant abortion or adoption, anything that would allow him to walk away clean and start his new life unencumbered. But when I looked at that ultrasound photo a week later, saw that tiny little heartbeat flickering on the screen, I knew I couldn't choose either of those paths. This baby was mine, and I was going to love her with everything I had. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Robert left for California 2 weeks after graduation. He sent a check for $500 with a note that said, "For medical expenses. Please don't contact me again." I never did. I kept that check for months before finally cashing it to buy a crib and some baby clothes. It was the last I ever heard from Amelia's father. I dropped out of college at the end of my sophomore year and moved back to my hometown of Millbrook, a small city where my grandmother had left me a tiny house when she passed away the year before. It wasn't much, 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a kitchen barely big enough for 2 people, but it was mine, and it was paid for. That little house became our sanctuary, the place where I learned to be a mother while grieving the future I'd planned. For myself, Amelia was born on a rainy Tuesday in October, and the moment they placed her in my arms, everything else disappeared. The fear, the uncertainty, the grief over my abandoned dreams, none of it mattered anymore. She was perfect, with tiny fingers that wrapped around mine and dark eyes that seemed to look right into my soul. I named her Amelia Rose, after my grandmother, who'd given us a home, and promised her that night that she would never want for anything as long as I had breath in my body. Those early years were the hardest of my life, but also the most beautiful. I worked 3 jobs to keep us afloat. Mornings at Murphy's Diner serving breakfast to the early shift workers, afternoons cleaning houses for wealthy families on the other side of town, and evenings at the community college where I finished. My degree 1 class at a time. Amelia came with me everywhere. She did her homework at the diner counter while I served coffee, played quietly in the corner while I vacuumed carpets, and fell asleep in the back of lecture halls while I pursued the teaching degree I was determined to complete. When Amelia was 5, I finally graduated with my bachelor's degree in English education. I remember walking across that stage with my cap and gown, looking out into the audience where my beautiful daughter sat in the front row clapping enthusiastically, and feeling like I could conquer the world. I'd done it. I'd raised a happy, healthy, bright little girl while earning my degree. Surely the hardest part was behind us. But life had other plans. The teaching jobs in our area were scarce, and when budget cuts hit the school district, they eliminated the 2 positions I'd been hoping for. I applied everywhere, neighboring towns, private schools, even substitute teaching, but nothing materialized. Meanwhile, the bills kept coming, and Amelia was growing out of her clothes faster than I could replace them. So I stayed at Murphy's Diner, telling myself it was temporary. I picked up more cleaning jobs, telling myself it was just until something better came along. I watched other people live the life I'd trained for while I poured coffee and scrubbed floors, but I convinced myself it didn't matter as long as Amelia was thriving, and she was thriving. Amelia was brilliant, reading at a high school level, by 4th grade, winning every art contest she entered, making friends easily despite our modest circumstances. She never complained about our small house or my secondhand clothes. When her friends' parents drove luxury cars to school pickup, she'd proudly point me out in my beat-up Honda Civic and tell everyone, "That's my mom. She works really hard." Remember the day she came home from second grade with a school assignment to write about her hero? While other kids wrote about celebrities or athletes, Amelia wrote about me. "My mom is my hero because she never gives up," she'd written in her careful 7-year-old handwriting. "She works 3 jobs so I can have everything I need, and she still helps me with my homework every night. She says dreams are worth fighting for, and she's teaching me to fight for mine." I cried that night reading her essay, but they were tears of joy. Whatever sacrifices I was making, whatever dreams I was deferring, they were worth it to raise a daughter who understood the value of hard work and perseverance. As Amelia grew older, her needs became more expensive. Piano lessons, art supplies, school trips, college preparation courses. I said yes to everything, picking up extra shifts and additional cleaning jobs to make it all possible. When she wanted to attend art camp the summer before her senior year, I worked double shifts for 3 months to pay for it. When she needed a laptop for college applications, I sold my grandmother's antique jewelry collection to buy her the best one available. Through it all, I kept my teaching degree hanging on the wall of our small living room, a reminder of the dreams I'd put on hold but never abandoned. Someday, I told myself, when Amelia was settled and successful, I'd find my way back to that classroom. Someday, I'd get to live my own dreams again. But somewhere along the way, someday stopped feeling like a real possibility. The years of double shifts and weekend work had become my identity. I was no longer Margaret Cole, the woman with dreams and ambitions. I was just Amelia's mom, the diner waitress, the cleaning lady who worked harder than anyone to make sure her daughter had every opportunity I'd missed. And Amelia, bless her heart, had grown up watching me sacrifice without ever questioning whether I might want something more for myself. She'd learned that mothers were supposed to disappear into their roles, that love meant giving up yourself completely for someone else's happiness. The years that followed Amelia's birth weren't just about working multiple jobs. They were about becoming someone I never thought I'd be. I became a master of making something from nothing, a magician who could stretch $1 until it screamed, and a woman who learned that impossible was just another word for, I haven't figured out how yet. When Amelia was 3 and desperately wanted to take ballet lessons like her friend Sophia, I couldn't afford the $60 a month for classes at the dance studio. So I found an old VHS tape of ballet basics at a garage sale for 50 cents, cleared out our tiny living room every evening, and learned the positions myself so I could teach her. We'd dance together in our socks on the hardwood floor, and she'd giggle when I'd wobble during pirouettes. "Mommy, you're silly," she'd say, not knowing that those makeshift lessons were saving us $720 a year that we desperately needed for groceries and utilities. By the time she was 6, Amelia had discovered art, and it became clear that this wasn't just a passing interest. It was her calling. She could spend hours drawing elaborate pictures with whatever crayons and markers I could afford, creating entire worlds on the backs of paper placemats I'd bring home from the diner. But art supplies were expensive, and good art supplies were astronomical for someone living paycheck to paycheck. I started what I called the Art Fund, a mason jar hidden behind the flour canister in our kitchen. Every tip that was more than I expected, every coin I found in the diner's couch cushions while cleaning, every penny saved from coupons and sales went into that jar. When it had enough for a new set of colored pencils or a sketch pad, I'd surprise Amelia with an art treasure hunt, hiding the supplies around the house for her to find. She thought it was a game. I thought it was survival. The survival of her dreams in a world that didn't make room for the dreams of poor kids. The real sacrifices started when Amelia entered middle school and her artistic talent became impossible to ignore. Her art teacher, Mrs. Patterson, pulled me aside during a parent conference and said, "Mrs. Cole, Amelia has exceptional ability. She should be in advanced classes, working with professional grade materials. Have you considered private lessons?" Private lessons. I'd been considering how to pay for Amelia's school supplies and whether we could afford new sneakers before winter. But I nodded and smiled and said I'd look into it, because that's what mothers do. They find ways to make the impossible possible. That's when I started my weekend cleaning business. Every Saturday and Sunday, while other mothers were sleeping, in or having coffee with friends, I was on my hands and knees scrubbing floors and bathrooms in the expensive houses across town. I'd wake up at 5 a.m. on Saturday mornings, kiss sleeping Amelia goodbye, and spend the next 10 hours cleaning for families who made more in a month than I made in a year. The first house I cleaned belonged to the Worthington family. Dr. Worthington was a surgeon, and his wife Victoria was a real estate agent who drove a Mercedes and wore designer clothes to grocery shop. Their house was a sprawling colonial with white carpets and marble countertops, and they had 3 kids who left messes without a second thought because they knew someone else would clean them up. I remember the first time I saw their daughter, Emma's bedroom. It was bigger than my entire apartment, with built-in shelves filled with art supplies that cost more than I made in a month. Professional-grade paint sets, easels, canvases, brushes that cost $30 each. Emma was a year older than Amelia and had about half her talent, but she had everything my daughter needed and took it all for granted. That day, I made a decision that would define the next decade of my life. I would work as many hours as necessary, clean as many houses as possible, and sacrifice whatever I had to sacrifice to ensure that Amelia's lack of money would never be the thing that limited her potential. I took on more houses. The Jeffersons, who had me deep clean their 5-bedroom house every other week. The Clarks, who wanted their windows washed monthly and their carpets steam cleaned quarterly. The Hendersons, who owned 3 rental properties that I maintained between tenants. By the time Amelia was in 8th grade, I was cleaning 12 houses regularly and picking up additional jobs whenever emergencies came up. The money from my weekend work went directly to Amelia's education and opportunities. Private art lessons with Ms. Rodriguez, who charged $50 an hour but recognized Amelia's talent and sometimes gave us discounts when I explained our situation. Art camps during summer breaks that cost more than I made in 6 months at the diner. High-quality supplies that allowed Amelia to create pieces that won competitions and scholarships. But the financial sacrifices were nothing compared to the personal ones. I stopped buying clothes for myself unless something literally fell apart. My wardrobe consisted of Murphy's diner uniforms and cleaning clothes, with one nice outfit for special occasions that I'd bought at a thrift store 3 years earlier. I hadn't been to a hair salon in 5 years. I trimmed my own hair in the bathroom mirror and touched up the gray with drugstore dye. I gave up friendships because I didn't have time for social activities or money for dinners out. While other single mothers were dating or building lives beyond their children, I was working 7 days a week and falling into bed exhausted every night. I told myself it was temporary, that once Amelia was established, I'd have time for my own life again. The worst sacrifice was giving up on my teaching dreams entirely. I'd kept my certification current for the first few years, hoping that an opportunity would arise, that somehow I'd find a way to balance a teaching salary with our needs. But as Amelia's requirements grew more expensive, advanced placement, classes, college prep courses, art portfolio development, I realized that teaching would actually mean less money and less flexibility than my current combination of jobs. So I let my certification lapse. I stopped checking job postings. I took down the teaching degree from our living room wall and put it in a drawer because looking at it every day had become too painful. I was no longer Margaret Cole, future educator. I was just the woman who served coffee and cleaned toilets so her daughter could become everything she herself had dreamed of being. The emotional sacrifices were perhaps the hardest. I learned to swallow my pride when Amelia's teachers assumed I couldn't help with her homework because of my job. I smiled when other parents looked at me with pity or disdain during school events, clearly wondering what someone like me was doing there. I pretended it didn't hurt when Amelia started making friends with kids whose parents drove luxury cars and lived in houses I only saw from the inside when I was cleaning them. But the hardest emotional sacrifice was teaching Amelia that my dreams didn't matter. Not intentionally, but through my actions. Every time I chose her needs over mine, every time I worked extra hours instead of pursuing my own goals, every time I smiled and said, "Don't worry about it," when she needed something expensive, I was teaching her that mothers were supposed to disappear into their role. I was teaching her that love meant erasing yourself. When Amelia was 16, she painted a portrait of me for a school art project. In her painting, I was wearing my Murphy's Diner uniform, carrying a cleaning bucket with a gentle smile on my face. The title was, "My Mother, My Hero." I cried when I saw it, but not entirely from joy. In that painting, I saw how Amelia saw me, not as a woman with dreams and aspirations of her own, but as someone whose entire identity was built around serving others. She'd painted exactly what I'd taught her to see. By the time Amelia graduated high school with a full scholarship to State University, I was proud beyond measure, but also completely exhausted. I was 38 years old, looked 50, and had nothing to show for nearly 2 decades of work except a daughter who was ready to conquer the world. I told myself that was enough, that her success was my success, that watching her thrive was all the reward I needed. But late at night, when I was alone in our small house, I sometimes wondered what had happened to the woman I used to be. The woman who'd had her own dreams, her own ambitions, her own life beyond being someone's mother. That woman felt like a character from a book I'd read long ago, familiar but distant, real but unreachable. But all of that sacrifice felt worth it. When Amelia called me 6 months ago, her voice bubbling with excitement, "Mom, Dylan proposed. We're getting married." In that moment, hearing the pure joy in my daughter's voice, every sleepless night and aching back felt like it had led to this perfect moment. Finally, after 23 years of giving everything I had, I was going to get to celebrate. I was going to dance with my daughter at her wedding, give the speech I'd been mentally writing for years, and watch her start the beautiful life I'd worked so hard to make possible. The moment Amelia called to tell me about Dylan's proposal, I felt like I could finally breathe again after holding my breath for 23 years. My daughter was getting married, and for the first time since she was born, I allowed myself to imagine a celebration that was about both of us, her beginning her new life, and me finally being recognized for helping make it all possible. "Mom, you should see the ring," Amelia had gushed during that first phone call, her voice higher and more animated than I'd heard it in years. "It's a vintage Art Deco setting with a 2-carat diamond. Dylan's grandmother left it to him, and he had it resized just for me. I can't believe I'm going to be Mrs. Green." I remember sitting in my small kitchen, still wearing my Murphy's Diner uniform from the morning shift, and feeling tears of pure joy streaming down my face. This was what all those double shifts had been for. This was why I'd scrubbed floors until my knees ached, and why I'd given up my own dreams. My beautiful, talented daughter was marrying a man who clearly adored her, and they were going to have the kind of life I'd always dreamed she could have. "Tell me everything about Dylan," I said, settling into my favorite chair with a cup of coffee, ready to savor every detail of my daughter's happiness. Dylan Green, it turned out, was everything I could have hoped for in a son-in-law. He was 26, just a year older than Amelia, and worked as a financial advisor for his father's investment firm. He'd graduated from State University with a business degree, the same university where Amelia had studied art on her full scholarship. They'd met in a coffee shop near campus during her senior year, and according to Amelia, it had been love at first sight. "He's so supportive of my art, Mom," she told me during one of our long phone conversations about wedding plans. "He's already talking about converting one of the rooms in his condo into a studio for me. Can you imagine? A real studio with proper lighting and everything." I could imagine, and it made my heart soar. After years of watching Amelia create masterpieces on our kitchen table or in the corner of her tiny bedroom, the thought of her having a dedicated space to pursue her passion felt like the ultimate validation of everything we'd worked for. Inside. The weeks that followed the engagement, I threw myself into wedding planning with an enthusiasm I hadn't felt in years. I started a new savings jar, this one labeled Amelia's Wedding, and began picking up extra shifts wherever I could find them. I wanted to contribute something meaningful to their special day, even if my budget was modest compared to what Dylan's family could afford. I spent my lunch breaks browsing bridal magazines at the library, taking notes on flowers and decorations and traditions. I researched mother of the bride etiquette online, reading articles about speeches and dances and what to wear. For the first time in decades, I was planning something celebratory for myself too, not just working to make someone else's dreams come true. The speech was what I was most excited about. I'd been mentally composing it since Amelia was born, but now I finally had a reason to write it down. I wanted to tell the story of the little girl who used to draw on napkins at the diner, who'd grown into a woman talented enough to earn a full scholarship and wise enough to choose a partner who supported her dreams. I wanted to thank everyone who'd helped along the way, her teachers, her art instructors, even the customers at Murphy's who'd always asked about her progress and celebrated her achievements with me. Most of all, I wanted to have one moment where I could stand in front of people and say, "This is my daughter, and I'm proud of the woman she's become, and proud of the mother I've been to her." I found the perfect dress at a consignment shop 3 towns over, a navy blue fit and flare with 3/4 sleeves that made me feel elegant without being too flashy. It cost more than I usually spent on clothes in 6 months, but I justified it by telling myself this was a once-in-a-lifetime occasion. I even splurged on a trip to an actual salon to have my hair professionally styled for the first time in years. When I tried everything on together, the dress, the shoes I'd bought to match, the simple pearl necklace that had been my grandmother's, I barely recognized the woman looking back at me in the mirror. She looked confident, proud, worthy, of standing next to her successful daughter and celebrating their shared journey. I started taking dance lessons at the community center, preparing for the mother-daughter dance that Amelia and I had talked about since she was little. We'd always said we'd dance to At Last by Etta James. It had been playing in my hospital room when she was born, and it felt like the perfect song to mark this new chapter in both our lives. I practiced the steps every evening in my living room, imagining the moment when my daughter and I would glide across the dance floor together while our friends and family watched with tears in their eyes. The guest list was small but meaningful. I invited my supervisor from Murphy's, Mrs. Chen, who'd been like a second mother to both Amelia and me over the years. I asked my neighbor, Mr. Roberts, who'd watched Amelia grow up and always had a kind word about her achievements. I even invited Ms. Rodriguez, Amelia's art teacher from high school, who'd been instrumental in developing her talent and helping her prepare for college. I spent hours addressing invitations in my best handwriting, each one feeling like a tiny celebration of the community that had helped raise my daughter. These were people who'd seen our struggles and our triumphs, who understood what this wedding represented for both of us. The planning gave me something to look forward to for the first time in years. Instead of just working to pay bills or fund Amelia's needs, I was working toward a celebration, our celebration. I picked up extra cleaning jobs on weekends, telling my clients about the wedding with such obvious pride that several of them gave me generous bonuses for the happy occasion. I researched traditions and customs, wanting everything to be perfect. I learned about the mother-son dance that would pair with our mother-daughter dance, imagining how sweet it would be to watch Dylan dance with his mother while I danced with my daughter. I read about the significance of different flowers and helped Amelia choose pink roses mixed with baby's breath, classic and elegant, just like she'd always been. The wedding dress shopping was supposed to be one of our special mother-daughter moments. I'd saved up money specifically for that day, planning to take Amelia to the best bridal salon in the city and help her find the dress of her dreams. But when the time came, Amelia gently told me that Dylan's mother, Patricia Green, had already offered to take her shopping at an exclusive boutique that required appointments and had designer gowns I could never afford. "She has such good taste, Mom," Amelia explained when I tried to hide my disappointment. "And she knows all the best places. Plus, she's paying for the dress as our engagement gift. I hope you understand." I did understand, or at least I told myself I did. Patricia Green could give Amelia experiences and opportunities that I simply couldn't afford. What mattered was that my daughter got the dress she wanted, not who helped her find it. But it stung a little, feeling like I was already being replaced in some of the traditions I'd been looking forward to for years. Still, I pushed those feelings aside and focused on what I could control: my speech, my dress, my contribution to making their day perfect. I was going to be the best mother of the bride possible, and everyone was going to see how much love and pride I had for my daughter. 3 weeks before the wedding, everything felt like it was falling into place. The invitations had been sent, my dress was hanging in my closet, and my speech was written and rewritten until every word felt perfect. I'd even started a new tradition of calling Amelia every Sunday to check on wedding details and share in her excitement. Those Sunday calls had become the highlight of my week. We'd talk for hours about flowers and music and last-minute details, and for those precious hours, it felt like we were the team we'd always been, mother and daughter working together toward a common goal. 3 weeks before the wedding, on what started as a perfectly ordinary Thursday morning, my world came crashing down with a single phone call. I was at Murphy's Diner, refilling coffee for the breakfast rush, humming "At Last" under my breath while I worked, a habit I'd developed since starting my dance lessons. Mrs. Chen had just complimented me on how happy I looked lately, saying I had a glow about me that she hadn't seen in years. "It's the wedding," I'd told her with a smile so big it made my cheeks hurt. 3 more weeks, and I get to dance with my daughter at her reception. I should have known that happiness that pure couldn't last. My phone rang during my break, and I saw Amelia's name on the screen. My heart did that little flutter it always did when she called. Even after all these years, hearing from my daughter was still the best part of any day. I stepped outside behind the diner, settling onto the old milk crate I used as a makeshift break room chair, ready for another one of our wedding planning conversations. "Hi, sweetheart," I answered, barely containing my excitement. "How did the final dress fitting go? Is everything perfect?" There was a pause on the other end, longer than usual, and when Amelia spoke, her voice had a strange, distant quality that immediately put me on edge. "Mom, I need to talk to you about something important." The happiness in my chest started to crystallize into something cold and hard. In 23 years of being her mother, I'd learned to read the subtle changes in Amelia's voice, and this tone, careful, rehearsed, slightly detached, meant she was about to tell me something she knew would hurt me. "Is everything okay?" I asked, gripping the phone tighter. "Is Dylan all right? Are you having second thoughts about—" "No, Mom, nothing like that. Dylan and I are fine. It's about the wedding." Relief flooded through me for exactly 3 seconds, before her next words destroyed everything I'd been looking forward to for months. "I need to talk to you about the reception." The way she said reception made my stomach drop. Not our reception or the reception plans, just the reception, like it was something separate from me entirely. "What about it, honey?" I managed to ask, though my voice sounded strange even to my own ears. Another pause. I could hear voices in the background. Dylan's voice, definitely, and another woman's voice that I didn't recognize but sounded older, more authoritative. It sounded like Amelia was reading from a script that other people had helped her write. "Mom, I need you to know how much I love you and how grateful I am for everything you've done for me over the years." When someone starts a conversation with, "I need you to know how much I love you," you know they're about to break your heart. "Amelia, you're scaring me. What's going on?" The thing is, Dylan's family has certain expectations about the wedding. They've been incredibly generous. They're paying for almost everything, and they've invited a lot of their friends and business associates. These are people who are really important to Dylan's career, people who could help us build our future together. Each word felt like a small knife, cutting away at the joy I'd been carrying for months. I knew where this conversation was heading, but I couldn't quite believe it was really happening. "That's wonderful, sweetheart," I said carefully. "I'm grateful to Dylan's family for being so generous. But what does that have to do with—" "Mom, I think it would be better if you just came to the ceremony." The words hit me like a physical blow. I actually gasped, the sound coming out of me before I could stop it. Behind me, I heard the kitchen door open and Mrs. Chen calling my name, but her voice sounded like it was coming from underwater. "Just the ceremony?" I repeated, certain I'd misunderstood. "The reception is going to be, well, it's going to be very formal, very different from what we originally planned. Dylan's parents are treating it almost like a business event, and there will be a lot of people we don't really know. I just think you'd be more comfortable, Amelia." My voice came out sharper than I intended, cutting through her carefully prepared explanation. "Are you telling me I'm not invited to your wedding reception?" The silence that followed lasted an eternity. I could hear my own heartbeat in my ears, could feel the autumn air getting colder against my skin, could smell the familiar scents of coffee and bacon from the diner that had been my second home for so many years. Everything felt surreal, like I was watching someone else's life fall apart. "It's not that you're not invited," she finally said, and I could hear tears in her voice now, which somehow made it worse. "It's just that I think you'd be happier just coming to the ceremony. You'll get to see me walk down the aisle, and that's what really matters, right? That's the important part." "The important part?" I stood up so quickly that the milk crate toppled over, clattering against the dumpster. "Amelia, I've been planning my speech for months. I've been taking dance lessons so we could have our mother-daughter dance. I bought a dress. I invited people. Mom, please don't make this harder than it has to be. Harder than it has to be." As if this was some unavoidable natural disaster instead of a choice she was actively making. "I don't understand," I said, and I hated how small my voice sounded. "What changed? Last week we were talking about the seating chart, and you wanted me to sit at the head table. We planned the whole timeline around our dance. What happened?" Another long pause, and when she spoke again, her voice was quieter, but somehow more final. "Dylan's parents are they're very particular about appearances. They move in certain circles, and this reception is as much about business and networking as it is about celebrating our marriage. I need everything to be perfect. Mom, I need to make a good impression. The implication hung in the air between us like a toxic cloud. I wasn't good enough. I, with my diner uniform and my secondhand dress and my working-class background, would somehow tarnish their perfect celebration. "Are you ashamed of me?" The question came out as barely a whisper. "No, Mom, no, it's not about being ashamed. It's about being practical. You work so hard and you've sacrificed so much, and I just think this kind of event would be stressful for you. All those people you don't know, all that formal protocol. Wouldn't you rather just come to the ceremony and then we can have a nice quiet dinner together the next week, just the two of us? A quiet dinner the next week, instead of dancing with my daughter at her wedding, instead of giving the speech I'd written and rewritten dozens of times, instead of celebrating 23 years of sacrifice and love with the community that had helped us along the way. She was offering me a consolation dinner like I was some distant relative who might cause a scene. "Where's the reception going to be?" I asked, though I wasn't sure why it mattered. "Oh, Dylan's family managed to get us this amazing venue through their connections," Amelia said, her voice brightening with relief at the change of subject. "It's this gorgeous estate called Grandview Manor. It's usually booked years in advance, but Mr. Green knows someone who knows someone, and they got us a huge discount. We're so lucky, Grandview Manor, my Grandview Manor. The property I'd bought with money saved from years of tips and weekend cleaning jobs. The venue I'd spent 3 years renovating with my own hands, learning plumbing and electrical work from YouTube videos because I couldn't afford contractors. The business that I'd built into one of the most sought-after wedding venues in the county. My daughter was planning to celebrate her wedding at the venue I owned, while excluding me from the celebration. The irony was so cruel it was almost funny. Almost. "That sounds beautiful," I managed to say, my voice remarkably steady considering my heart was breaking into 1,000 pieces. "I knew you'd understand, Mom. You always do. You're so good about being flexible and putting what's best for the family first. That's one of the things I've always admired about you. What's best for the family. Being flexible. Always understanding. These were the very qualities that had brought us to this moment. My willingness to sacrifice, to step aside, to put everyone else's needs before my own. I'd taught her so well that she could dismiss me from the most important day of her life, while genuinely believing she was being kind." After we hung up, I sat behind the diner for a long time, staring at my phone and trying to process what had just happened. Mrs. Chen came out twice to check on me, but I waved her away, not trusting my voice to stay steady if I tried to explain. 23 years of single motherhood, of working multiple jobs, of sacrificing every dream and comfort I'd ever wanted, and this was my reward. Being told I wasn't good enough to celebrate my own daughter's wedding. But as I sat there in the cold autumn air, surrounded by the smells and sounds of the life I'd built around serving others, one thought kept echoing in my mind. The 3 days following Amelia's phone call were the longest of my life. I went through the motions of my daily routine, serving coffee at Murphy's, cleaning the Henderson house on Saturday, doing laundry in my small apartment, but inside, I felt like I was drowning in disbelief and hurt. Every time I looked at my carefully chosen mother of the bride dress hanging in my closet, or saw the speech I'd written sitting on my kitchen table, the reality of what had happened hit me fresh all over again. But it was the questions that were killing me. Questions that kept me awake at night, staring at the ceiling and trying to understand how we'd gotten to this point. When had I become someone to be ashamed of? When had Amelia stopped seeing me as her mother and started seeing me as an embarrassment? And most importantly, was this really about Dylan's family's expectations, or was there something deeper going on? Sunday evening, 3 days after the phone call, I decided I needed answers. I'd been replaying our conversation over and over, picking apart every word, every pause, every inflection in Amelia's voice. Something about it had felt wrong beyond just the devastating news itself. She'd sounded rehearsed, like she was reading from a script, and those voices I'd heard in the background kept nagging at me. I did something I'd never done before in 23 years of being Amelia's mother. I decided to spy on her. It felt wrong, invasive, like I was betraying the trust we'd built over the years, but I needed to understand what was really happening. Needed to know if this decision was truly coming from her, or if she was being influenced by people who didn't understand our relationship or our history. I knew that Sunday evenings, Amelia usually had dinner with Dylan and his parents at their house, a weekly tradition that had started after the engagement. She'd mentioned it casually in our phone calls, always speaking warmly about how welcoming the Green family had been. I'd been happy about it, grateful that she was being embraced by her future in-laws. Now I wondered what those dinners were really like. The Green family lived in Willowbrook Estates, the most exclusive neighborhood in our area. I'd cleaned houses there during my weekend work, so I knew the area well. Sprawling colonials with perfectly manicured lawns, circular driveways, and the kind of quiet that comes from having enough money to insulate yourself from the noise of the real world. Parked my beat-up Honda Civic 3 streets away and walked through the neighborhood, trying to look like I belonged there. It wasn't hard. I'd learned to be invisible in places like this during my years of cleaning. Rich people rarely really saw the service workers in their midst. The greenhouse was exactly what I'd expected. A massive Tudor-style home with leaded glass windows and a front lawn that probably cost more to maintain each month than I made at the diner. Dylan's silver BMW was in the driveway next to a black Mercedes that I assumed belonged to his parents. And there, looking small and out of place next to the luxury vehicles, was Amelia's modest Honda Accord, the car I'd helped her buy 3 years ago with money saved from my weekend cleaning jobs. I crept around to the back of the house, staying in the shadows of the perfectly trimmed hedges. The dining room windows faced the backyard, and I could see them all gathered around a massive mahogany table that could have seated 12 people comfortably. They were having what looked like an elegant dinner: crystal glasses, cloth napkins, probably courses I couldn't even pronounce. But it was the body language that told the real story. Amelia sat between Dylan and his mother, Patricia Green, and even from a distance, I could see how small she looked. Her shoulders were hunched slightly forward, her head tilted down in a way that spoke of deference, maybe even shame. Dylan's father, a distinguished-looking man in his 50s, was speaking animatedly, gesturing with his wine glass, clearly dominating the conversation. I moved closer, staying hidden behind an ornamental garden shed until I could hear fragments of their conversation through the slightly open window. Simply cannot have any complications at the reception, Mr. Green was saying, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. The Worthington Group will be there, along with the board members from Continental Investments. This event needs to project the right image. I understand, Mr. Green, Amelia said, her voice so quiet I could barely hear it. I've already talked to my mother about it. And how did she take the news? Patricia Green asked, her tone suggesting she already knew. The answer wouldn't be good. She was hurt, Amelia admitted, and I could hear the pain in her voice even from my hiding place. But she'll understand eventually. She always does. The important thing, Dylan interjected, is that everyone knows this was our decision, not something we were forced into. We can't have people thinking we're ashamed of family. But that's exactly what this was. Shame, dressed up in pretty language about complications and projecting the right image, but shame nonetheless. Of course not, Mr. Green said smoothly. But we also can't ignore practical realities. Margaret works in food service, doesn't she? And cleaning? It's honest work, certainly, but hardly the background that inspires confidence in our business. Associates. The way he said food service and cleaning made my stomach turn. Like they were dirty words. Like the work that had fed and clothed and educated his future daughter-in-law was somehow beneath notice. She worked those jobs for me, Amelia said, and for a moment, I heard an echo of the daughter who used to defend me proudly. Everything she did was to give me opportunities. And that's admirable, dear, Patricia said, her voice dripping with condescension. But now you have to think about your future. You're joining our family, and that comes with certain responsibilities, certain standards. I watched as Dylan reached over and took Amelia's hand, squeezing it gently. Baby, no one's saying your mom isn't a good person, but this reception is about more than just celebrating our marriage. It's about launching our life together in the right social circles. Your mom will understand. She wants what's best for you. What's best for me? The phrase I'd heard countless times over the years, usually right before I was asked to sacrifice something else for Amelia's benefit. Besides, Mr. Green continued, it's not like she's missing the actual wedding. She'll see you get married, and that's what matters to a mother, isn't it? All this reception business is just formality anyway. Just formality. The mother-daughter dance I'd been practicing for months. The speech I'd written about our journey together. The chance to celebrate 23 years of single motherhood with the people who'd helped us along the way. All of it dismissed as just formality. The venue is absolutely perfect, by the way, Patricia was saying. Richard's contact at the Grandview Manor came through beautifully. $15,000 for a venue that usually charges $25,000? It's practically theft. I almost laughed at the irony. If they only knew that the contact was probably my property management company, and that the discount was likely the standard rate I charged for wedding receptions. But hearing them talk about my venue, my investment, my security, my secret accomplishment, like it was some favor being done for them, made my blood boil. And the best part, Dylan added, is that no one will know we got a deal. Everyone will think we paid full price for the most exclusive venue in the county. It's perfect for the image we want to project. Image. Always image. Not love, not family, not celebrating the actual marriage, just image. "Amelia, darling," Patricia said, turning to my daughter with the kind of smile that didn't reach her eyes. "You do understand why this is all necessary, don't you? We're not trying to be cruel. We're trying to protect your future." I watched. My daughter nod, her expression a mixture of sadness and resignation that broke my heart. "I know. It's just, she's been looking forward to this for so long. She's been taking dance lessons and she bought a dress and she's written a speech." Speech? Mr. Green's eyebrows shot up like this was the most horrifying thing he'd heard all evening. "What kind of speech?" "Just about our journey together. About how proud she is of me. Normal mother of the bride stuff." The silence that followed was deafening. I could practically see the collective shudder that went through the Green family at the thought of me standing up at their elegant reception and talking about our life of struggle and sacrifice. "Well," Patricia finally said, "I think we've made the right decision then." Can you imagine if she'd gotten up in front of the Worthington group and started talking about whatever it is she would have talked about? "Diner stories," Dylan said, with a laugh that made me want to march through that window and slap him. "She probably would have told everyone about all the times she worked double shifts to pay for your art supplies." They all laughed at that, gentle, sophisticated laughter that somehow made it worse than if they'd been openly cruel. They were laughing at my sacrifices, at the love that had driven me to work myself to exhaustion for my daughter's dreams. "The important thing," Mr. Green said, his voice taking on a more serious tone, "is that this stays between us. Amelia, you cannot let your mother know that this decision came from us. As far as she's concerned, this was entirely your choice based on your own concerns about her comfort level." "But that's not true," Amelia protested weakly. "It's a kind lie," Patricia said smoothly. "Better to let her think you're trying to protect her feelings than to let her know the truth. The truth would only hurt her more. The truth was that they'd convinced my daughter to exclude me from her wedding reception because they were ashamed of my working-class background. The truth was that they valued their business connections more than the woman who'd raised their future daughter-in-law. The truth was that my 23 years of sacrifice meant nothing to them because it didn't fit their image of success. I stood there in the shadows of their perfect garden, listening to them plan how to lie to me about breaking my heart, and felt something inside me shift. The hurt was still there, sharper than ever, but underneath it was something else. Anger. Pure, righteous anger at being dismissed and discarded by people who had no idea what real sacrifice looked like. As I crept away from their house and walked back to my car, one thought kept echoing in my mind. They wanted to play games with image and deception? Fine. But they had no idea who they were really dealing with. After what I'd overheard at the Green family dinner, I thought I'd reached the bottom of how much my daughter's betrayal could hurt me. I was wrong. Over the next few days, as I tried to process what I'd learned, I made discoveries that cut even deeper than being excluded from the reception. I found out that this wasn't just about the wedding, it was about erasing me from Amelia's life entirely. It started on Tuesday morning when I was opening the mail at my apartment. Among the usual bills and advertisements was an envelope addressed to me in elegant handwriting that I didn't recognize. Inside was a wedding invitation, not to Amelia's wedding, but to her college roommate Jessica's wedding that was happening 2 months after Amelia's. At the bottom of the invitation, Jessica had written a personal note. "Margaret, I hope you..." Can make it. I know how busy you must be with Amelia's wedding planning, but I'd love to have you there. Amelia speaks so highly of the advice you've been giving her about married life. Advice about married life? I hadn't spoken to Amelia about marriage beyond the basic wedding planning details. In fact, our conversations had become increasingly surface level since the engagement, and I'd assumed it was just because she was busy with Dylan and his family. But the note made me realize something else. If Jessica was inviting me to her wedding in September, she obviously didn't know that I was being excluded from my own daughter's reception in August, which meant Amelia hadn't told anyone about her decision to ban me from the celebration. That afternoon, I did something I rarely allowed myself to do. I left Murphy's early, claiming I felt sick, and drove to the State University campus where Amelia had gone to school. I told myself I was just going to surprise her, maybe take her to lunch and try to understand what was really going through her mind. But honestly, I was desperate to find some way to connect with the daughter I felt like I was losing. I found her in the campus coffee shop where she'd told me she and Dylan first met, sitting at a corner table with her laptop open, working on what looked like wedding planning materials. She wasn't alone. Sitting across from her was a woman I recognized from photos as Patricia Green, Dylan's mother. I hung back behind a column, close enough to see and hear them but hidden from their view. What I witnessed over the next 20 minutes destroyed any remaining illusions I had about my relationship with my daughter. Now, about your employment situation, Patricia was saying, scrolling through something on her tablet. Richard's firm has several entry-level positions that would be perfect for someone with your art background. Marketing, client relations, event planning, much more suitable for Dylan's wife than whatever it is you're doing now. I work part-time at the campus gallery, Amelia said quietly. And I do some freelance illustration work. Yes, well, that's very bohemian, but it's not exactly a career, is it? You need something with more legitimacy, something that reflects your new position in society. I watched my daughter nod meekly, agreeing to give up the art career I'd sacrificed everything to make possible. The career she'd dreamed of since she was 3 years old, drawing with crayons on napkins. And about your living situation, Patricia continued. Dylan mentioned that you've been thinking about keeping that little apartment near campus. It's just for my art studio, Amelia explained. The lighting is perfect, and I have all my supplies set up there. Darling, you'll be living in Dylan's condo downtown. It's much more appropriate for a young professional couple. Besides, this art hobby of yours, well, it's sweet, but it's not exactly practical for a woman in your position, is it? Art hobby. 20 years of nurturing Amelia's talent, of working double shifts to pay for supplies and lessons and camps, and this woman was calling it a hobby. I suppose you're right, Amelia said, and I could hear the defeat in her voice. Of course I am. Now let's talk about your family situation. My heart stopped. Here it comes, I thought. Dylan tells me your mother is being quite understanding. About the reception arrangements. She's hurt, Amelia admitted. But yes, she's trying to be understanding. Good. The thing is, darling, this can't be a one-time thing. You need to start creating some distance, healthy boundaries. Distance? Boundaries? From the woman who'd raised her alone for 23 years? I don't understand, Amelia said, echoing my own thoughts. Patricia leaned forward, her voice taking on a confidential tone that made my skin crawl. Amelia, you're marrying into a family with certain social expectations. Your mother seems like a lovely woman, I'm sure. But her lifestyle, well, it's not compatible with the circles you'll be moving in as Dylan's wife. What do you mean? I mean those Sunday dinners you have with her. The way you still call her for advice about everything. The way you light up when you talk about her. It's sweet, but it's also limiting. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. She was asking my daughter to stop loving me, to stop seeking. My advice, to stop enjoying our relationship because it didn't fit their social expectations. Think about it practically. Patricia continued. When Dylan brings colleagues home for dinner, how will you explain that your mother works at a diner? When you're invited to charity galas and social events, will you bring her as your guest? When you have children, do you really want them picking up her mannerisms? Mannerisms. Like being kind to service workers was something to be ashamed of. Like working hard for your family was a character flaw. But she's my mother, Amelia said, and for a moment I heard the little girl who used to defend me to her classmates. Of course she is, and no one's suggesting you cut her off entirely. But you can't let sentiment hold you back from the life you deserve. Limited contact, formal occasions only. Holiday visits, maybe a birthday dinner, but not this weekly phone. Calls and constant involvement in your decisions. I watched my daughter's face as she processed this advice, and I saw the exact moment when she made her choice. Her shoulders straightened slightly, and when she spoke again, her voice had taken on that same distant quality I'd heard during our devastating phone conversation. You're probably right. I do rely on her too much. Dylan and I need to build our own life without interference. 23 years of unconditional love and support reduced to interference. Exactly. And the sooner you establish these boundaries, the easier it will be for everyone. Your mother will adjust. Women like her always do. They're used to adapting. Women like her. Women like me. As if we were a different species, bred for sacrifice and resignation. They moved on to discussing flower arrangements and seating charts, but I couldn't listen anymore. I stumbled out of the coffee shop and sat in my car in the parking lot, shaking with a combination of grief and rage that I'd never experienced before. This wasn't just about the wedding reception. This was about Patricia Green systematically, dismantling the relationship I'd spent 23 years building with my daughter. She was training Amelia to be ashamed of me, to see our closeness as something embarrassing that needed to be hidden away, and Amelia was letting it happen. More than that, she was agreeing to it. That evening, I called Amelia as I did every Sunday, trying to keep my voice normal despite everything I'd learned. "Hi, Mom," she answered, and her voice had that new quality again, polite but distant, like she was talking to an acquaintance instead of the woman who'd raised her. "How was your week, sweetheart?" I asked, giving her the chance to tell me about her meeting with Patricia, about the job opportunity, about any of the major life decisions she was apparently making without me. "Oh, just wedding stuff. Nothing too exciting. Nothing too exciting." Planning to abandon her art career, give up her independence, and create distance from her mother. None of that was worth mentioning. We talked for exactly 15 minutes, compared to our usual hour-long conversations, and when we hung up, I knew our relationship had already fundamentally changed. The weekly calls that Patricia had mentioned with such disdain were clearly numbered. As I sat in my small apartment that night, surrounded by 23 years of memories and mementos from our life together, I realized that losing Amelia to marriage was one thing. Losing her to people who thought I wasn't good enough to be part of her life was something else entirely. But the Green family had made one crucial miscalculation. They assumed that someone like me, someone who'd spent her life serving others, accommodating others, putting others first, would simply accept their decision and fade quietly into the background. They were about to learn how wrong they were, because Margaret Cole had spent 23 years building something more valuable than social connections or business networks. She'd built strength, resilience, and the kind of determination that comes from fighting for everything you have. That night, after the devastating phone call with Amelia, the call where I could hear Patricia Green's influence in every careful, distant word my daughter spoke, I sat in my small living room and did something I hadn't done in 23 years. I looked in the mirror and asked myself a question that had nothing to do with being someone's mother. "Margaret Cole, what do you want?" The woman staring back at me was almost unrecognizable. When had I become so small? When had I learned to make myself invisible, to apologize for taking up space, to measure my worth only by how well I could serve others without asking for anything in return? The Margaret I saw in that mirror was tired, worn down, and had apparently taught her own daughter that she was something to be hidden away when more impressive people were around. But underneath that exhausted exterior, I glimpsed something I hadn't seen in decades, the woman I used to be. Margaret Cole at 19, who'd had dreams and ambitions of her own. Margaret Cole who'd put herself through college while pregnant and working multiple jobs. Margaret Cole who'd bought and renovated an entire estate property through sheer determination and backbreaking work. That woman was still in there. She'd been buried under years of selfless motherhood and financial struggle, but she wasn't gone. For the first time in 23 years, I allowed myself to feel angry. Not just hurt, not just disappointed, but righteously, powerfully angry. I was angry at Patricia Green for her manipulative social engineering. I was angry at Dylan for going along with his parents' snobbery. I was angry at Amelia for letting them convince her that our relationship was something to be ashamed of. But mostly, I was angry at myself. For teaching Amelia that love meant erasing yourself. For accepting crumbs when I deserved a seat at the table. For believing that being a good mother meant disappearing into the role so completely that I forgot I was a person with value beyond my ability to sacrifice. Well, Margaret Cole was done disappearing. I walked to my bedroom closet and pulled out a storage box I hadn't opened in years. Inside were the documents that proved what the Green family didn't know, that their perfect wedding venue, their exclusive Grandview Manor that they'd gotten such a deal on, belonged to me. I spread the papers across my kitchen table. The deed, the business licenses, the renovation permits, the insurance policies, 8 years of financial records showing the transformation of a foreclosed property into the most sought-after wedding venue in the county. Every document bore my name, Margaret Cole, sole proprietor. The irony was so perfect it almost made me laugh. Almost. But as I sat there looking at the evidence of my hidden success, a plan began forming in my mind. Not a plan for revenge. That was too small, too petty for what I was feeling. This was a plan for justice. A plan for teaching some very important lessons about respect, about assumptions, and about the danger of underestimating people based on their circumstances. The Green family thought they were dealing with a simple diner waitress who would quietly accept being pushed aside. They had no idea they were actually dealing with a successful businesswoman who owned the very venue where they planned to celebrate while excluding her. But I wasn't going to tip my hand too early. If I was going to do this right, I needed to be strategic. I needed to let them dig their hole deeper while I prepared my response. The next morning, I called in sick to Murphy's Diner for the first time in 5 years. Mrs. Chen was so shocked that she offered to drive me to the hospital, but I assured her I just needed a day to rest. What I actually needed was a day to plan. First, I called Elite Property Management, the company I'd hired to handle the day-to-day operations of Grandview Manor. I'd chosen them specifically because they were discreet and professional, and none of their staff knew about my personal connection to the property. As far as anyone was concerned, Margaret Cole, the venue owner, and Margaret Cole, the diner waitress, were two completely different people. Mrs. Cole, Janet from Elite Property Management answered. How lovely to hear from you. Is everything all right? Everything's fine, Janet. I'm calling about the Green Davis wedding that's booked for next Saturday. Can you walk me through the current arrangements? Of course. It's going to be a beautiful event. They've booked the full venue package. The grand ballroom, the gardens, catering for 150 guests, full bar service, and the bridal suite for preparation. Mr. Green Sr. handled all the arrangements personally, and he's been quite particular about the details. Particular. That was one way to put it. I could imagine Richard Green throwing his weight around, expecting everyone to jump when he snapped his fingers. And the deposit and payments are all current? I asked. Yes, they paid the deposit 6 months ago, and the final payment is due this Friday, 3 days before the event. Standard procedure. Perfect. I had 3 days to implement my plan. Janet, I need to make some changes to the contract. Are you available to meet today? Of course, Mrs. Cole. Is there a problem? Not a problem exactly. Let's just say I've discovered some personal connections to this particular event that require special handling. That afternoon, I sat in the elegant conference room at Elite Property Management, a conference room in a building I technically owned, though the property management company handled all the day-to-day operations, and laid out my plan to Janet. Want to be personally involved in this event, I told her. I'll be handling the final walkthrough, coordinating with the catering staff, and overseeing all the details on the day of the wedding. The wedding. Janet looked puzzled. In 8 years of owning Grandview Manor, I'd never shown interest in being personally involved with individual events. Mrs. Cole, are you sure? We have everything well in hand, and I know you prefer to remain behind the scenes. This one is special, I said. Let's just say I have a personal investment in making sure everything goes perfectly. Of course. Should I contact Mr. Green to let him know about the change in management? No, I said quickly. I prefer to handle client relations myself for this event. In fact, I think it would be best if they don't know about my personal involvement until the day of the wedding. I want to surprise them. Surprise was definitely the right word. Over the next 2 days, I threw myself into wedding preparation with an energy I hadn't felt in years. But I wasn't preparing for the wedding Amelia thought she was having. I was preparing for something much more significant. I researched every detail of the Green family's guest list, their business connections, their social circles. I studied the seating chart they'd submitted, noting which guests were Dylan's business colleagues, which were Patricia's social circle, and which were the handful of Amelia's friends who'd been deemed appropriate for the occasion. I also did something I'd never done before. I researched my own daughter's life from the outside. I looked up her art portfolio online, read articles about her scholarship awards, found mentions of her academic achievements. What I discovered broke my heart and strengthened my resolve in equal measure. Amelia Davis, the name she'd started, using professionally, dropping Cole entirely, was incredibly talented. Her art was stunning, sophisticated, worthy of gallery shows and serious attention. She'd won competitions, earned academic honors, and had real potential for a significant career in the art world. And Patricia Green was systematically convincing her to give it all up to become a corporate wife. But what really caught my attention was an interview Amelia had given to the university newspaper 2 years ago during her senior year. When asked about her inspiration, she'd said, "Everything I owe to my mother. She worked multiple jobs to support my dreams, and she never once complained or asked for recognition. She taught me that real strength comes from lifting others up, even when no one is watching. That was the daughter I'd raised. That was the woman I'd sacrificed everything to nurture. She was still in there, buried under Patricia Green's social conditioning, but she was still there." By Thursday evening, everything was in place. I'd coordinated with the catering staff, confirmed all the details with the vendors, and prepared my surprise for Saturday evening. I'd also done something else. I'd written a new speech. Not the gentle, grateful mother of the bride speech I'd originally planned, but something else entirely. On Friday morning, I called Amelia one last time before the wedding. "Hi, sweetheart," I said, keeping my voice warm and loving. "I just wanted to tell you how proud I am of you and how much I love you, no matter what." "Mom?" She sounded surprised by the call and maybe a little guilty. "Is everything okay?" "Everything is perfect, honey. I hope you have the most memorable wedding day imaginable. I really do." Because she was about to discover that sometimes the most memorable days are the ones that don't go according to plan. Friday morning arrived with the kind of crisp autumn air that promised a perfect wedding day. While Amelia was probably getting her nails done and Dylan was likely at his bachelor party, I was putting the finishing touches on a plan that would change everything for all of us. My first stop was Grandview Manor itself. I needed to see the venue through fresh eyes, to understand exactly how the Green family envisioned their perfect celebration, and to make sure every detail was in place for what I had planned. I drove through the gates I'd had installed 3 years ago, up the winding drive lined with oak trees I'd personally selected and planted. The manor looked magnificent in the morning light, its limestone facade gleaming, the gardens I'd designed in full autumn bloom, the fountain I'd restored sparkling in the center of the circular courtyard. 8 years ago, this place had been a crumbling estate with a leaking roof, broken windows, and overgrown grounds. Today, it was the most prestigious wedding venue in the county, booked solid for the next 2 years. And it was mine. Every brick, every rosebush, every crystal chandelier, all of it the result of my vision, my work, my investment. The cruel irony wasn't lost on me. The Green family had chosen this venue specifically because it represented the kind of elegance and exclusivity they valued, the same elegance and exclusivity they thought I lacked. They had no idea that the lower-class woman they were excluding from their celebration had created the very environment where they planned to showcase their superiority. Janet from Elite Property Management met me at the main entrance, tablet in hand and her usual professional smile in place. "Mrs. Cole, everything is on schedule for tomorrow. The catering team will arrive at 10 a.m., flowers at noon, and the Green family has booked the bridal suite from 2 p.m. for preparation." Perfect. Walk me through their specific requests. As we toured the venue, Janet outlined the elaborate details the Green family had demanded. Crystal stemware for every table setting, real silverware instead of the standard stainless steel, upgraded linens in ivory silk instead of cotton, premium bar service with top-shelf liquors only. They'd spared no expense in creating their vision of perfection. Mr. Green was very specific about the guest flow, Janet continued as we walked through the grand ballroom. Cocktails in the garden pavilion first, then guests move here for dinner and dancing. He's arranged for a string quartet during dinner and a full band afterward. I nodded, picturing how it would unfold. And the bridal party arrival? They'll come directly to the bridal suite after the ceremony at St. Mary's Cathedral. Photos in the garden at 4 p.m., cocktail hour starts at 5 p.m., dinner at 6:30 p.m. Very traditional timeline. Very traditional, except for the glaring absence of the bride's mother from every single moment of the celebration. "Janet, I need to make some additions to tomorrow's arrangements." Her eyebrows raised slightly. "Additions? Mrs. Cole, the event is in less than 24 hours. The final headcount has been submitted, catering confirmed. Don't worry, nothing that will disrupt your excellent planning. I simply want to ensure that we provide some additional surprises for the Green family, special touches that will make this day truly unforgettable." I spent the next hour outlining my requirements. Janet's expression grew increasingly puzzled as I detailed my requests, but she nodded and took notes without question. After 8 years of working together, she trusted my judgment, even when my instructions seemed unusual. "And you're certain you want to handle the evening coordination personally?" she asked when I finished. "Absolutely. This is one event where I want to be hands-on from start to finish." After leaving the venue, I made several other important stops. First, I visited Marcus Thompson, the photographer I'd hired for dozens of events at Grandview Manor. Marcus was talented, discreet, and most importantly, he owed me several favors for the business I'd sent his way over the years. "Margaret?" Marcus looked surprised to see me at his studio. "Don't tell me you're finally going to let me photograph you for the Grandview Manor marketing materials." "Not exactly, Marcus. I need a favor. Tomorrow evening, I want you to document every moment of the Green Davis wedding reception. Not just the pretty poses and formal shots. I want candid moments, conversations, reactions. Everything. That's unusual. Most clients want carefully curated photo packages. This sounds more like photojournalism." That's exactly what it is. Consider it a documentary project. I'll pay your premium rate, plus a bonus for discretion. Marcus studied my face for a moment, clearly sensing there was more to this story than I was telling him. This wouldn't have anything to do with you wanting evidence of something, would it? Let's just say I have a feeling tomorrow night is going to be very newsworthy. My next stop was the most important, the law offices of Bradley and Associates, where I'd worked with attorney Sarah Bradley to establish the business structure for Grandview Manor 8 years ago. Sarah was sharp, ethical, and had helped me navigate the complex process of converting a residential property into a commercial venue. Margaret, what a pleasant surprise. Sarah greeted me as I was shown into her office. How's business at the manor? Thriving, thanks to your excellent legal work. But I'm here about something more immediate. I need to understand my rights regarding event cancellations and property access. Sarah leaned back in her chair, her expression growing more serious. What kind of situation are we talking about? I chose my words carefully. Hypothetically, if I discovered that clients had misrepresented important information when booking the venue, or if circumstances arose that made their event problematic for my business reputation, what would be my legal standing? Well, hypothetically, Sarah said with a slight smile, you'd need to review the specific terms of the contract. Most venue agreements include clauses about acceptable conduct, truthful representation, and the venue owner's right to maintain certain standards. Why? Are you having problems with a particular event? Let's just say I'm making sure I understand all my options before tomorrow evening. I spent an hour with Sarah, reviewing contract language and discussing scenarios. By the time I left her office, I was confident that I had every legal right to handle tomorrow's situation exactly as I planned. My final stop was perhaps the most emotionally difficult, Murphy's Diner. I needed to request tomorrow evening off, and I needed to explain to Mrs. Chen why I was taking personal time for the first time in 5 years. Margaret, you look different, Mrs. Chen observed as I sat down across from her in the back booth we used for serious conversations. Something in your eyes. Determined. Mrs. Chen had always been perceptive. She'd watched me struggle through Amelia's childhood, celebrated with me when Amelia graduated, and tactfully never asked why I sometimes seemed to have more money than a diner waitress should have. Mrs. Chen, I need tomorrow evening off. There's something I have to do. Of course, dear. Personal business? I hesitated, then decided she deserved some version of the truth. My daughter's wedding reception. There's been a misunderstanding. That needs to be cleared up. Mrs. Chen reached across the table and patted my hand. You've been carrying something heavy for weeks now. I could see it in your shoulders, in the way you hold your head. Tomorrow, you take care of whatever needs taking care of. Don't worry about the diner. That evening, I laid out my clothes for the next day. Not the navy blue mother-of-the-bride dress I'd bought months ago with such hope and excitement. That dress would stay in my closet as a reminder of lessons learned. Instead, I chose a black business suit I'd purchased 2 years ago for venue owner meetings, paired with the pearl necklace that had been my grandmother's. Professional, elegant, and unmistakably authoritative. I also prepared something else. A folder containing copies of every document related to Grandview Manor. The deed, the business licenses, 8 years of financial records, renovation permits, insurance policies, and the original contract for tomorrow's event. Everything the Green family would need to understand exactly who they'd been dealing with. Finally, I called my old friend Helen Rodriguez, Amelia's former art teacher, who'd been one of the few people invited to both the ceremony and reception. Margaret, I'm so excited for tomorrow. You must be over the moon. Helen, I need to ask you a favor. When you get to the reception tomorrow evening, I want you to pay close attention to what happens. Really close attention. Is everything all right? You sound different. Everything will be fine. Better than fine. I just want to make sure there are witnesses to what promises to be a very educational evening. That night, I slept better than I had in weeks. Tomorrow, the Green family would learn that their perfect wedding venue came with a perfect surprise. Sometimes the people you underestimate are the ones holding all the cards. Tomorrow, Margaret Cole would finally step out of the shadows and reclaim her place at her daughter's celebration. Saturday evening arrived with golden sunset light streaming through the windows of Grandview Manor as I stood in my office, yes, my office, watching the final preparations unfold below. From this second-floor vantage point, I could see everything. The catering staff arranging elaborate flower displays in the garden pavilion, the string quartet tuning their instruments, and elite property management staff making final adjustments to what would undoubtedly be called the most memorable wedding reception of the year. At 4 p.m., the bridal party arrived in a convoy of luxury vehicles. I watched Dylan step out of a silver Mercedes, looking handsome in his black tuxedo, followed by his groomsmen. Then came the bridesmaids in their dusty rose gowns, laughing and chattering as they made their way toward the bridal suite. And finally, Amelia. My breath caught in my throat when I saw her. She was absolutely stunning in a flowing ivory gown with delicate lace sleeves and a cathedral train that sparkled in the afternoon light. Her dark hair was swept up in an elegant chignon, and even from a distance, I could see the radiant smile that had always been my greatest joy to witness. For a moment, my resolve wavered. This was my daughter on her wedding day, looking like a princess, starting what should be the happiest chapter of her life. Was I really going to interrupt that with the confrontation I'd planned? Then I saw Patricia Green step out of a black Bentley, resplendent in navy silk and pearls, surveying the venue with the satisfied air of someone who believed she'd orchestrated something perfect. Behind her came Richard Green in an expensive suit, checking his watch and barking orders at the staff as if he owned the place. The irony steeled my resolve. He thought he did own the place, or at least he thought he owned the right to exclude me from it. At 5 p.m., guests began arriving for cocktail hour. I recognized many faces from my research: business associates from Richard's investment firm, members of Patricia's country club, socialites from their exclusive circle. These were the people whose opinions mattered more to my daughter than her own mother's presence. I also spotted the handful of people who were there for Amelia rather than the Green family: her former roommate Jessica, her college friend Michael, and, my heart warmed, Helen Rodriguez, who looked around the elegant surroundings with the same appreciation for beauty that had made her such an inspiring art teacher. At 6:15 p.m., I made my entrance. I walked down the main staircase of Grandview Manor in my black business suit, carrying the leather folder that contained 8 years of documentation, with Marcus the photographer discreetly capturing every moment from his position near the garden doors. The conversations in the grand foyer gradually quieted as guests noticed an unfamiliar woman making her way through the crowd with unmistakable authority. Patricia Green was the first to spot me. I watched her face transform from polite social smile to confused recognition to something approaching panic as she realized that the woman she'd worked so hard to exclude was standing in the middle of their perfect reception. "Excuse me," she said, approaching me with the kind of forced smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I think there's been some mistake. This is a private event." "No mistake," I replied calmly, my voice carrying clearly in the suddenly quiet foyer. "I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." Amelia appeared at Patricia's shoulder, her face pale beneath her carefully applied makeup. "Mom? What are you doing here? How did you get in?" Before I could answer, Richard Green materialized beside his wife, his expression thunderous. "Security," he barked. "We need security." "That won't be necessary," I said, opening my leather folder and extracting the first document. "Allow me to introduce myself properly. My name is Margaret Cole, and I'm the owner of Grandview Manor." The silence that followed was absolute. I could hear the string quartet still playing in the garden, the distant clink of cocktail glasses, the whisper of autumn wind through the oak trees. But in the foyer, You could have heard a pin drop. Dylan was the first to break the silence. That's impossible. My father arranged this venue through his business connections. Your father, I said, turning to face him directly, arranged this venue through Elite Property Management, which handles bookings for the property owner. That would be me. I handed him a copy of the deed, watching his face as he read my name on the legal document. I bought this property 8 years ago and spent 3 years renovating it personally. Every room you see, every garden path you've walked on, every elegant detail you've been admiring, I designed it, I built it, I own it. Richard Green's face had turned an alarming shade of red. This is ridiculous. We have a contract. Yes, you do, I interrupted, pulling out another document. A contract with Margaret Cole, DBA Grandview Manor Events. That's me. And according to the terms of that contract, I have every right to be present at events held on my property. The crowd of guests had begun to gather around us, drawn by the drama unfolding in their midst. I could see phones being discreetly pulled out, social media posts probably already being composed about the bizarre scene at the Green wedding. Amelia stepped forward, tears streaming down her carefully made-up face. Mom, I don't understand. Why didn't you tell me? When would I have told you? I asked gently. During one of our increasingly distant phone calls? During the wedding planning process I was excluded from? Or maybe I should have mentioned it when you called to uninvite me from your reception because I was too embarrassing to celebrate with? The crowd murmured at this revelation. Several guests looked shocked, clearly unaware that the bride's own mother had been banned from the celebration. Patricia Green stepped forward, her composure cracking. This is a setup, some kind of revenge plot, security. Mrs. Green, I said, my voice cutting through her protests. I am the security here. This is my property, my business, my venue that you've been bragging about securing through your connections. And now you're standing in my ballroom, having excluded me from my own daughter's celebration, lecturing me about plots and revenge. I turned to address the entire crowd, my voice carrying the authority of someone who had built something from nothing through pure determination. Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for interrupting your evening, but I felt it was important to clarify a few things. Helen Rodriguez stepped forward from the crowd, her face beaming with pride and satisfaction. Margaret Cole, she said loudly enough for everyone to hear. You magnificent woman, magnificent woman. Richard Green made one last attempt to regain control. I don't care who you are or what you own. We have a contract, we've paid our fees, and you have no right to disrupt our private event. Actually, I said, pulling out the final document, from my folder, I have every right. According to Section 12 of your contract, the venue owner reserves the right to refuse service or terminate events that violate the establishment's standards of conduct or misrepresent material facts during the booking process. Sarah Bradley's legal coaching was paying off beautifully. When you booked this venue, I continued, you were asked to provide accurate information about the wedding party and any special circumstances that might affect the event. You failed. To mention that you were planning to exclude the bride's mother from the celebration. That's a material omission that affects my venue's reputation and violates our family-friendly event standards. Dylan stepped forward, his face a mixture of confusion and growing anger. This is insane. Amelia, tell her to leave. This is our wedding. Amelia looked between her new husband and her mother, tears flowing freely now. For the first time since this whole ordeal began, I saw a flicker of the daughter I'd raised, the girl who used to defend me to her classmates, who wrote essays about me being her hero. Dylan, she said quietly, she's right. We did exclude her, and this is her venue. I don't care whose venue it is, Dylan exploded. She's ruining our wedding. No, I said firmly. You ruined my daughter's wedding the moment you convinced her that the woman who raised her, who sacrificed everything for her dreams, who worked 3 jobs to pay for her education, wasn't good enough to celebrate her achievements. I turned back to Amelia, my voice softening. Sweetheart, I didn't come here to ruin your day. I came here to remind you of something you seem to have forgotten. You are the daughter of Margaret Cole, a woman who built a business with her own hands, who owns the venue you chose for your celebration, and who loves you enough to fight for her place in your life, even when you try to push her away. The crowd was completely silent now, every eye focused on the drama playing out between mother and daughter. I came here to give you a choice, I continued. You can have your reception here at my venue with all the elegance and beauty you dreamed of, but not without your mother. I'm not asking to give a speech or have our dance. I know that ship has sailed. I'm simply asking to be allowed to celebrate my daughter's wedding like any other guest. Amelia looked around at the faces surrounding us, at Dylan's family, at their distinguished guests, at the friends who'd watched this scene unfold with growing understanding of what had really happened here. And then she looked at me. Yes, she whispered, so quietly I almost didn't hear her. Then, louder, yes, Mom, please stay. Please. The transformation in that moment was extraordinary. The crowd began to applaud, tentatively at first, then with growing enthusiasm. Helen Rodriguez was openly crying. Even some of the Green family's business associates were nodding with what looked like approval. But Richard Green wasn't finished. This is unacceptable, he declared. We're leaving. Amelia, Dylan, we're going back to the club. We'll have the reception there. That's when I played my final card. I'm afraid that won't be possible, I said calmly. Your catering is here, your flowers are here, your band is here, your guests are here. But more importantly, your final payment is due tonight. And as of this moment, it's been declined. Richard Green's face went white. What do you mean, declined? I mean that when you booked this venue, you agreed to pay $15,000 for the reception package. But the actual rate for Grandview Manor on a Saturday evening in peak season is $25,000. The discount you thought you received through your connections was actually my standard rate. If you'd like to continue with tonight's reception, the balance of $10,000 is due immediately. The silence was deafening. Of course, I added with a smile. I'd be happy to waive that additional fee for my daughter's wedding reception, assuming, of course, that her mother is welcome to attend. The silence that followed my final ultimatum stretched for what felt like an eternity. Richard Green stood frozen, his face cycling through emotions I'd never seen on a man accustomed to being in control, shock, rage, humiliation, and finally, grudging calculation. The math was simple: $10,000 to save face, or complete social destruction in front of every business associate and society connection he'd spent decades cultivating. Patricia Green looked like she'd aged 10 years in 10 minutes. The woman who'd orchestrated my exclusion with such cool manipulation now found herself utterly powerless, her carefully constructed social hierarchy crumbling around her. But it was Dylan whose reaction surprised me most. Instead of the entitled anger I'd expected, I saw something that looked almost like respect. He stared at me with newfound understanding, perhaps realizing for the first time that he'd underestimated not just me, but the woman he'd married. Mom, Amelia whispered, stepping closer to me. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I reached out and took her hand, feeling the familiar warmth of my daughter's touch for the first time in months. We'll talk later, sweetheart. Right now, let's focus on celebrating your marriage. Richard Green cleared his throat, his voice strained but civil. Mrs. Cole, I believe we can work out the financial arrangements. Perhaps we could discuss this privately? No need for privacy, Mr. Green. The choice is simple. My daughter's mother attends her reception, or there is no reception. Your decision. Helen Rodriguez stepped forward from the crowd, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd taught difficult teenagers for 30 years. For what it's worth, I think Margaret has been more than gracious. If I were in her position, I would have made this conversation far more public and far less pleasant. Several guests murmured agreement. The social dynamics had shifted completely. Margaret Cole was no longer the embarrassing working-class mother to be hidden away. She was the successful businesswoman who'd been wronged, and public opinion was firmly on her side. "Of course," Richard said finally, each word seeming to cost him enormous effort. "Margaret, Mrs. Cole, please join us for the celebration, as our honored guest." I could have savored the victory longer, could have made them grovel or forced them to acknowledge every slight and insult. But as I looked at Amelia's tear-streaked face, I realized that wasn't what I wanted. I didn't need their groveling. I needed my daughter back. "Thank you," I said simply. "I'm honored to celebrate Amelia and Dylan's marriage." The reception that followed was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. Word of the dramatic revelation spread quickly among the guests, and I found myself surrounded by people who wanted to hear the story of how a single mother had built a successful business while raising her daughter. Business associates who'd dismissed me moments earlier were now asking for my card, clearly recognizing that anyone who could accomplish what I had might be worth knowing. But the most meaningful moment came an hour into the reception when the band announced a special dance. "Ladies and gentlemen, we'd like to invite the bride and her mother to the dance floor for a dance that's been 23 years in the making." I looked at Amelia in surprise. "Sweetheart, you don't have to—" "Yes, I do," she said, taking my hand and leading me toward the dance floor. "I've been so stupid, Mom. So incredibly stupid." As the opening notes of At Last by Etta James filled the ballroom, the song we'd planned for this moment years ago, Amelia and I began to dance. Around us, the other guests stopped their conversations to watch, and I saw more than one person wiping away tears. "I let them change me," Amelia whispered as we swayed together. "I let them convince me that our life was something to be ashamed of instead of something to be proud of." "You're young," I said softly. "You're starting a new life with someone you love. It's natural to want to fit in, to make a good impression. But not at the cost of forgetting who I am. Not at the cost of hurting the person who made me who I am." When the song ended, the applause was thunderous. Dylan appeared beside us, and I braced myself for another confrontation. Instead, he looked directly at me and said, "Mrs. Cole, I owe you an apology?" Several apologies, actually. I studied his face, seeing genuine remorse rather than the calculated charm I'd witnessed before. "Dylan? No, please, let me say this. I let my parents' opinions override my own judgment, and I influenced Amelia to do the same. You raised an incredible woman, and instead of being grateful for that, I was embarrassed by the circumstances. That was wrong, and I'm sorry." Over the following months, our relationship began to heal in ways I'd never expected. Dylan, freed from his parents' influence and perhaps humbled by the events of the wedding night, proved to be genuinely supportive of Amelia's art career. They moved into a larger apartment that included a proper studio, and Amelia began painting again with a passion I hadn't seen since her college days. The Green family's attitude shifted dramatically as well. Richard, after his initial humiliation, proved to be pragmatic enough to recognize a business opportunity when he saw one. He began referring wealthy clients to Grandview Manor for their events, and Patricia even hosted her book club's annual fundraiser at the venue. Our relationship would never be warm, but it had evolved into a grudging mutual respect. The most significant change, however, was in my own life. The revelation of my success had freed me from the identity I'd been trapped in for so long. I reduced my hours at Murphy's Diner. Mrs. Chen was thrilled to see me finally acknowledge my other accomplishments and began taking a more active role in managing Grandview Manor. 6 months after the wedding, I did something I'd dreamed of for 23 years. I enrolled in graduate school to finally become the teacher I'd always wanted to be. At 42, I was older than most of my classmates, but I discovered that life experience was an asset, not a liability, in education. Amelia was my biggest supporter throughout the process. "Mom," she said during one of our now weekly dinner, Watching you go back to school has inspired me to apply for that gallery showing I've been putting off. If you can chase your dreams at 42, I can certainly chase mine at 25. The gallery showing was a tremendous success. Amelia's paintings, vibrant, emotional pieces that drew on our shared experience of struggle and triumph, sold out on opening night. The local newspaper wrote a feature article about the mother-daughter team. The single mom who'd built a business empire while pursuing her teaching dreams, and the daughter who'd found her artistic voice by reconnecting with her roots. A year. After the wedding drama, Amelia called me with news that changed everything once again. "Mom, I'm pregnant." This time, there was no hesitation in her voice, no distance or carefully constructed barriers. Just pure joy and the immediate assumption that I would be an integral part of this new chapter. "I want you to be there for everything," she continued. "Doctor's appointments, baby shopping, the birth, everything. I want my daughter or son to know from day one that they have a grandmother who's strong and accomplished and never, ever to be underestimated." As I hung up the phone, I looked around my small apartment, the same apartment I'd lived in for 15 years, but which now felt like a choice rather than a limitation. On my desk was my teaching degree, finally earned at 43. On my walls were photos from Amelia's gallery opening, her wedding reception, the real one where I belonged, and family dinners with Dylan, who'd become the son-in-law I'd always hoped for. The woman in those photos was someone I barely recognized, from 2 years ago. She stood tall, smiled confidently, and took up space without apologizing for it. She was Margaret Cole, not just Amelia's mother, not just the diner waitress, not just the cleaning lady, but a complete person with her own accomplishments, her own dreams, and her own worth. Most importantly, she was someone who'd learned that love doesn't require you to disappear. Real love, the kind worth fighting for, celebrates who you are rather than asking you to hide it. Sometimes the most important lessons come from the people who try to diminish you. The Green family had taught me that my worth wasn't determined by their approval, and that sometimes the people who claim to love you need to be reminded of who you really are. As I prepared for my new role as grandmother, teacher, and business owner, I realized that the best was yet to come. Margaret Cole had finally stepped fully into her own life, and there was no going back. The woman who'd once cleaned other people's houses now owned the most elegant venue in the county. The single mother who'd worked 3 jobs to support her daughter's dreams had earned her own teaching degree. The diner waitress who'd been deemed too embarrassing for a wedding reception had become someone whose respect was worth earning. And the most beautiful part? My daughter had learned to see me not as someone to be hidden away, but as someone to be proud of. That, more than any business success or personal achievement, was the victory that mattered most. Final message to camera. Sometimes the people who love us need to be reminded that we're worth celebrating, not hiding. Don't ever let anyone convince you that your struggles make you less worthy of respect. Your sacrifices don't make you smaller, they make you stronger. And when someone tries to push you into the shadows, sometimes the most loving thing you can do is step into the light and show them exactly who they're dealing with. Never underestimate the power of a woman who's fought for everything she has. We're capable of far more than anyone, including ourselves, might imagine. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.